You're watching KING TV, Seattle.
This is King News Service for Saturday, August 5th. Reported by Lou Dobbs.
Good evening. One person has been killed, several others seriously.
This is King 5 News for Sunday, December 14th. Reported by Aaron Brown with Elaine Perkins and Jeff Renner.
Good evening, everyone. Today, millions of people are...
This is King 5 News, Monday, March 30th. Reported by Gene Anderson and Mike James.
Good evening. President Reagan is in good condition.
From Seattle, from the King Northwest Network, from the nation's capital, from News Center 5, Don Madsen.
Good morning. It's Friday, December 3rd.
And now, Hattie Kaufman and Don Porter with Chuck Weiss weather and Lou Gellos sports. This is King 5 News.
And good evening again. Hattie Kaufman is off tonight. Snow.
And now, Don Porter with Jeff Renner weather, Tony Ventrella sports, and arts and entertainment editor Lucy Mole. Western Washington's most watched late-night newscast, King 5 News.
The Montreal Canadiens have taken...
From King 5 in Seattle, David Curley with Rich Marriott weather and Lou Gellos sports. This is King 5 News.
Good evening. An explosion and fire ripped through...
Is Western Washington's most watched late-night newscast with Don Porter, Jeff Renner weather, and Tony Ventrella sports. This is King 5 News.
Good evening. Politicians run for office.
Live from Seattle, this is King 5 News with David Curley, Joyce Taylor, Lou Gellos, and Rich Marriott.
Good afternoon.
Live from Seattle, this is the Northwest's most watched late-night newscast with Don Porter, Jeff Renner weather, and Tony Ventrella sports. This is King 5 News.
Good evening.
Live from Seattle, this is King 5 News with Gene Anderson, Mike James, Tony Ventrella, and Jeff Renner. This is the 6 o'clock report.
Again, good.
Live from Seattle, this is King 5 News with David Curley, Joyce Taylor, Lou Gellos, and Rich Marriott.
Good evening. Joyce Taylor has the evening off.
Live from Seattle, this is the Northwest's most watched late-night newscast with Don Porter, Tony Ventrella, and Jeff Renner. This is King 5 News.
Good evening. Don Porter is off tonight. I'm Mike James.
Number 1 at 5 o'clock, King 5 Television. And now, with all the news for Western Washington, Gene Anderson and Barry Judd, meteorologist Jeff Renner, and Tony Ventrella sports. This is King 5 News. Number 1 at 11. This is King 5 Television. And now, with all the news for Western Washington, Gene Anderson and Barry Judd, Meteorologist Jeff Renner and Tony Ventrella Sports. This is King 5 News at 11. When news happens, you'll see it happen on King 5. And now, with all the news for Western Washington, Gene Anderson and Mike James, Shelley Monahan's weather, and Tony Ventrella Sports. This is King 5 News at 11.
The snow at first, the relief to flood victims is now.
Number 1 at 11, King 5 Television. And now, with all the news for Western Washington, Lori Matsukawa and David Curley, with Shelley Monahan, weather, and Carlos Del Valle, sports. This is King 5 News at 11.
Number 1 in the Northwest, you're watching King 5 News. Coverage you can count on. With all the news for Western Washington, today's top story, and first alert weather. And now, King 5 News at 6:30.
Marching for a cause.
Number 1 at 11. Coverage you can count on for all of Western Washington. This is King 5 News at 11.
He's like a hero.
Number 1 at 11. You're watching King 5 News with Lori Matsukawa, Dennis Bounds, Jeff Renner's First Alert Weather, and Paul Sylvie's Sports. Coverage you can count on. King 5 News at 11.
Breaking news tonight.
Number 1 in Western Washington with coverage you can count on. Broadcasting in HD TV from Digital Studio A. King 5 Morning News. Number 1 in Western Washington with coverage you can count on. Broadcasting in HD TV from Digital Studio A. King 5 News at 5.
All day, police and SWAT.
You're watching King 5 News at 5 with Gene Anderson, Dennis Bounds, Jeff Renner's First Alert Weather, and Paul Sylvie's Sports. Number 1 at 5 with coverage you can count on. King 5 News at 5.
A Seattle neighborhood is under siege tonight.
Number 1 at 6:30. King 5 News starts now.
November is sure going out with a blast of winter. Tonight, the...
You're watching King 5 News at 6:30 with Gene Anderson, Dennis Bounds, Jeff Renner's First Alert Weather, and Paul Sylvie's Sports. Number 1 at 6:30 with coverage you can count on. King 5 News at 6:30. Welcome back. You're watching King 5 News at 6:30 with Alan Schaffler, Mimi Chung, Megan Black's First Alert Weather, and Greg Bailey's Sports. Number 1 on the weekend with coverage you can count on. King 5 News at 6:30. Number 1 in Western Washington with coverage you can count on. Broadcasting in HD TV from Digital Studio A. King 5 News at 11. Number 1 at 11. King 5 News starts now.
There it is, a bright light streaking.
You're watching King 5 News at 11 with Margaret Larson, Dennis Bounds, Jeff Renner's First Alert Weather, and Paul Sylvie's Sports. Number 1 at 11 with coverage you can count on. King 5 News at 11. You're watching King 5 News at 11 with Mimi Chung, Don Porter, Megan Black's First Alert Weather, and Greg Bailey's Sports. Number 1 on the weekend with coverage you can count on. King 5 News at 11.
King 5 News with all the latest news, weather, and sports. Number 1 in Western Washington, this is King 5 News. Number 1 in the mornings, King 5 News on Kong starts now. Number 1 at noon, King 5 News starts now. Number 1 at 5, King 5 News starts now. King 5 News with Gene Anderson, Dennis Bounds, Jeff Renner First Alert Weather, and Paul Sylvie Sports. Number 1 in Western Washington, King 5 News at 5.
An avalanche stops traffic on Snoqualmie Pass this afternoon.
King 5 News with Gene Emerson, Dennis Bounds, Jeff Renner, First Alert Weather, and Paul Sylvie, Sports. Number 1 in Western Washington, King 5 News at 5.
I want to update you now on the fatal Oregon Mall shooting.
Number 1 at 6:30, King 5 News starts now. King 5 News with Gene Emerson, Dennis Bounds, Jeff Renner, First Alert Weather, and Paul Sylvie, Sports. Number 1 in Western Washington, King 5 News at 6:30. The only local news at 7 o'clock. King 5 News starts now.
The gun control debate and Starbucks. Why is the corporation receiving...
The most watched news in Western Washington. King 5 News at 9 starts now.
Good evening, I'm Rob Piercy, and this is King 5 News at 9 on Kong.
The most watched news in Western Washington. King 5 News starts now.
Tonight, the search is...
Number 1 at 10. King 5 News on Kong starts now.
Crash.
King 5 News with Lori Matsukawa, Dennis Bounds, Shannon O'Donnell, First Alert Weather, and Paul Sylvie, Sports. The most watched news in Western Washington. King 5 News at 10 on Kong. Number 1 at 11. King 5 News starts. You're watching King 5 News.
Good morning, everybody. Time now is 4:30. I'm Greg Copeland. Dallas leaders are working to...
The most watched news in Western Washington. This is King 5 News.
Good.
You're watching King 5 News. You're watching King 5 News.
Trouble.
The most watched news in Western Washington. This is King 5 News.
Good evening. Seattle Mayor Murray taking aim at President Trump.
You're watching King 5 News.
Good evening. I'm Angela Russell. The road to the Super Bowl is still open right now.
And right now at 6, I-5 southbound lanes reopened after that deadly...
Good morning, everybody. On this Friday, right now at 4:30, we are tracking breaking news. A horrific crash involving a rail safety system is being...
This is so devastating to wait 2 years for one day. I can't hear you. And then that.
We now have 2 deputies in the hospital and the suspect is deceased.
2 deputies are shot after service.
It's a new day.
From the King 5 Studios, it's New Day Northwest with Amity and Treasy.
Well, hello, my friend.
This is King 5 News at noon. Let's start with the update. 2 Pierce County Sheriff's deputies who were shot during a SWAT operation.
This is King 5 News at 5 with Joyce Taylor.
And we begin with the scene of yet another child.
Hey there, everyone. So glad you could join us tonight from a speakeasy, which is very cool. And we're
3 men have been found guilty in the 2017 murders of a family in Kitsap County.
We start with breaking news.
Bounds. King 5 News.